You know, you got nice color skin. What color would you say that is?
My color.
The Osage. They have the worst land possible. But they outsmarted everybody. The land had oil on it. Black gold. Money flows freely here now.
I do love that money, sir.
This wealth should come to us. Their time is over. It's just going to be another tragedy.
When this money started coming, we should have known it came with something else. They're like buzzards circling our people. We're still warriors.
I ought to kill these white men who killed my family. I need you here.
I am right here.
You've got to take back control of your home.
I was sent down from Washington, D.C. to see about these murders.
See, what about him?
See who's doing it.
Expecting a miracle to make all this go away. You know they don't happen anymore.
So today I'm joined by A Camera and Steadicam operator Scott Sakamoto, as well as B Camera operator Steven Matzinger, to talk about their work on Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. Hey, you guys, how's it going?
Good.
Hello.
Thank you, David.
Scott, I know you had worked with Scorsese previously on The Irishman. Can you talk a little bit about how your experience on Killers of the Flower Moon compares with the work you've done with him in the past?
Both Irishman and Killers was just a remarkable experience on supposedly a true story. Irishman is a little bit of you can question if that really happened with, Jimmy Hoffa. But Killers is certainly a movie that, 100 years ago, this event was kind of swept underneath the rug, including the Tulsa massacres and all that. I think it's an important picture that we were a part of, and it's nice to be part of Marty's vision for this.
And Steve, if I'm not mistaken, this was your first time working with Marty, correct?
It was and intimidating.
Tell me a little bit about how you got involved with the project and sort of what it was like working with Martin Scorsese for the first time.
Well, I think Rodrigo generally operated his own cameras, and he started changing his way of working to have operators. And I think he started maybe a little bit more on The Irishman, and then now on this picture. And so he wanted 2 cameras to be able to shoot cross coverage. And Scott recommended me, and Trevor Loomis, the first assistant, recommended me to come in and be the B camera. So that's how I got the job, and it was fantastic. It was mostly a 1-camera shoot, but because Marty has so many, his shots are planned and lined up, but we did a lot of cross coverage, and that's where I would come in on any heavy dialogue scenes. I did a lot of the cross coverage for that.
There's this sort of interesting motif of photography that runs through the movie that I was noticing. You know, the movie opens with this newsreel footage introducing us to the story and the setting of the Osage people at this time. Then a little bit later, we see the Osage people in town getting their photos taken. There's the crime scene photographs of the murders. So there's this kind of thread that runs through the whole movie with photography. My personal read on that was sort of interrogating how history remembered this moment or didn't remember this moment versus the reality of what actually happened. I'm curious, though, as camera operators who are very actively taking a role in capturing the story on film, what was your take on this idea of how we frame these stories?
Oh, well, let me start by saying that, it was Marty's idea to use his own hand crank camera for that black and white footage, which we thought was quite ingenious and quite special to be using Marty's own camera. And, he uses that black and white footage to kind of explain how the Osage became the chosen people of this oil wealth. And I think that was a very cool idea to make it pseudo newsreel footage and to be able to show that throughout the movie and to give the audience that perspective, like this is real-time history that you're seeing in modern day or modern times, I guess. And I thought that was a very effective way for Marty to integrate throughout the movie, to keep people aware that this stuff's kind of true. This is not made up. And I think that's how I think that's a great way, even though we follow Leo and his relationship with his wife, which is partly fictional, partly not. You don't know the whole story of their whole relationship. You do know that these Osage people were, pushed out of their land, given this land, and fortunately, they were fortunate to benefit from the mineral rights and become quite wealthy through the oil. So I think that was a great way for Marty to convey that.
Steve, you were sort of talking a little bit about this, but just sort of Marty style and how specific he is in his shot choices and stuff like that. It's interesting because stylistically, this film is sort of equal parts crime drama and Western. Could you both talk a little bit about what went into developing the look of the film?
Steve, you want to elaborate on that? Or, it might be kind of tough because a lot of that it was done in pre-production with Rodrigo and Marty. They devised this look along with the production designer and the costumes to give that period Western. And I think Marty, I don't know if he's ever done a Western before, but I think he really relished this opportunity. If you look at the end of the movie, it was very with radio performance, which was probably done in those days, how news was presented to the American people. And I think, together with Rodrigo's, to come up with that look that they designed, and the wardrobe and the art direction, I think was, all well thought out. Unbeknownst to Steve, well before Steve and I were probably part of this movie.
And even I think a little bit of the shot selection was it's classic cinema, which Marty really embraces. It isn't a fanciful, big moves, big giant sweeping things. It's classically framed, classically told, straightforward in a cinematic way, not in a documentary way, but cinematically straightforward, so that it gives a truth to the story, which I found wonderful. And with appropriate moving shots to Scott did a lot of poignant POV shots that are cinematic, classic, and truthful, which I felt told the story very well and kept it honest and the audience involved in the story.
Yeah, Scott, that was something you had mentioned earlier when we were talking about sort of the point of view perspective and some of these shots that you did, and how that was something that Marty and Prieto really wanted to pursue with this movie. Could you talk a little bit more about achieving those sort of shots?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if you look at Marty's history of movies, that's his kind of cinematic, technical, visionary style. You know, he wants you to be one of those characters. He wants you to experience what that character is experiencing. And I think one of the classic things that Marty likes to do is do these kind of Steadicam shots that are one of the characters, and the people reacting to that character are looking right into the lens, and you kind of feel as the audience what that character is feeling, whether it's this uncomfortableness or whatever. I mean, I can come up with like an example, like when Molly is at the train station platform and I believe she's going to Washington to try to gather the FBI to investigate the murders. And she's walking with Leo, and she's walking through a crowd of people, and all these people are just staring at her like she's some kind of outcast. And the people, we had them look right into the lens. And it's one of those classic Marty POV shots where you as the audience feel that tension and that anxiety of people kind of looking at you, you know, with a bad eye or with ridicule. And it's one of Marty's classic shots that he likes to do. And then you cut back to her in an extreme close-up, and you see her eyes just darting left and right, and you feel her emotion there. And that's one of the many kind of shots that Marty likes to do, at least to incorporate that character into the audience.
Yeah, it's really interesting because one of the ways that the film sort of departs from David Grann's book is that the book kind of plays more out as like a police procedural where you're not really sure who the murderers are, who's responsible for these crimes, where the movie lets you know pretty much from the jump who's responsible and how all these relationships sort of fit together. And it creates this really interesting tension with the audience in these relationships between Ernest and Molly, between William Hale and the Osage people, where we see kind of both sides of this coin that they're both playing. And I think that really comes across in some of the POV stuff as well.
Yeah, I think it's great. And you really start to see it, and, you know, you see that happen in Leo. You know, he's this innocent kid who falls in love and really ends up liking his wife, Molly, yet he's kind of put under the pressure by his uncle to do this dirty deed of slowly poisoning his wife to gain wealth. And it is an interesting development in his acting, and you know, it's something that the audience knows at the beginning what's going to happen in a way, and you're there to study this character.
Honkashi. No, don't close it.
What?
No, we need to be quiet for a while. Storm, it's powerful. So we need to be quiet for a while.
It's good for the crops, that's for sure.
Just be still.
And another thing you were mentioning earlier was the way that a lot of this was shot on sort of large practical sets, which allowed you, for instance, to be able to move through various rooms of Ernest and Molly's house and get those all in continuous shots versus, you know, moving from one set to another. Could you talk a little bit about some of the challenges and benefits of shooting in that way?
You know, Marty wants you to feel and experience what these Osage people are living. And that shot that you're describing that goes through the house, he wants you to see what that ordinary house, what the dynamics are in that house, you know, the family and how they intermix with the housekeepers and how they lived in a quite wealthy way all through the house. And, you know, he likes to portray that in one shot, you know, not cutting around from room to room, but slowly experiencing, you know, what the dynamics are with all the people in the house. And I think that shot was kind of really cool in describing that and ending up on the mother in bed by the front door, who has this look of, I don't know, probably skepticism or suspicion of what's really these people's motivations of the white man in their traditional you know, environment.
And Steve, I wanted to dig in a little bit more on sort of your side of things as B camera operator. I know you said that because Marty has such a specific style and has these shots in mind that he's looking for, a lot of this was sort of one camera, but tell me a little bit about how you do find those moments where you can really get in there with B camera and pick up things that complement what Scott's doing on A camera.
Well, you stay involved, and that's a first thing. You stay very involved in everything that's going on. I'm watching Scott when it is one camera. I'm very involved and be with Rodrigo next to him or on another monitor, making sure that I know exactly what Scott's doing on maybe the master shot. And then when we go in to do coverage, or if I get sent off to shoot something else, I'm very aware of what's happening. And so, but everything is very much comes from Marty to Rodrigo to Scott or to me. And it isn't, most times when I'm doing B camera, I'm very free, and I love doing B camera because I can be very free, and the director and the cameraman don't talk to me. They just say, Steve, get something. And then it's always like, they're so concentrated on A camera that they look over to the B camera monitor and they're like, oh my God, Steve, thank you so much. You're getting that piece. We needed that so much. This was not that type of thing, and I didn't expect it to be from the beginning. I expected it to be more controlled with Marty. And it very much came to Marty, to Rodrigo, and then Rodrigo would say, okay, Steve, come over here and get this side angle or what have you. It wasn't a picking off type of thing. It was very thought out. And but each shot was essential and needed. And that was a good feeling too, that my shots weren't wasted. Whereas again, on another show, they might be, go Steve, do a bunch of stuff, and it doesn't make it in the movie because it's arty and fun, but it's not essential to the story. These were essential shots, I felt, and most of them did make it in. And yeah, I think is that the.
I just want to add that, you know, we did a lot of 2-camera coverage on dialogue scenes, and it was very beneficial for both of us to capture those moments because Marty doesn't like to do a lot of takes, especially with 2 people talking, and he wants that continuity, and he doesn't want to have to keep going over the same dialogue over and over. And it was very beneficial all the time to have both of us 2-camera coverage to each be on the other corresponding actor, and that was very, very helpful. And it gave the actors a lot of freedom to do what they want to do in minimum amount of takes.
Yeah, I found that particular thing true all the way through Marty's process, where it was allowed the freedom for the actors to improvise something. I mean, some great moments of improvisation between Marty and between Bob and Leo. And then also, what impressed me with Marty was his ability to be. He was all his shots, I felt, were thought out, but he was willing to be open to finessing them. It wasn't so laid out that you couldn't change something. It wasn't so thought out or so pre-visualized. There was no pre-visualization. It was more of a pre-conversation, I think, with Rodrigo and Marty and Scott, and allowing for artistic interpretation. Very much allowing for Scott to have artistic interpretation to the shot.
We'd always walk away and we'd always know that both of our shots are going to make the movie one way or another. Other cut is different, but we knew that, you know, my shot wasn't going to replace his shot. You know, it wasn't just like he was getting the same thing from a different angle. He was getting a corresponding shot. And we kind of knew that from after the first couple of weeks. It was not something that we can take his camera lightly or my camera lightly. We knew that they were both equally going to be important.
You know, you were talking about shooting dialogue coverage, and especially with a cast as good as this. I mean, oh my God, you've got Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, Lily Gladstone is so good in this. And then, you know, in the back half of the movie, so many people show up in, you know, just little bit roles, but, you know, it's kind of a murderer's row of talent. Tell me a little bit about what it was like working with all these people.
Well, you know, when you got guys like Leo and Bob, who are such the masters of acting and films, that everybody else behind them and after them brings up their game too, and they were just great to work with. They really were. And I also want to kind of emphasize that we had a lot of Osage with us who have never acted before, and they were really great and really emotional, and they were probably the most emotional times of making the movie is when they were giving their speeches. And you know, I turn around and look at Rodrigo or Steve, and we go, oh my God, just listen to these heart-wrenching stories that they're telling their personal lives in front of the camera too. And it was quite moving.
Of course, they are so fantastic, and Leo, yeah, very much so that it's so wonderful to work with those actors that are very aware, and in their career at this point are very aware of what the camera is doing, able to help the camera without any. You don't need to go to Leo and say, Leo, this time could you just be a little over to the left because you're blocked behind somebody. He's so aware of what the camera is doing and what is going on that becomes effortless and very helpful, and to the point of helping some of these Osage actors or maybe less experienced actors, and helping them along and bringing their performance up to a level that was fantastic. And as Scott said with the Osage, how wonderful it was to film these wonderful people that are on their own land, filming on their own land in their own hometowns where all this event happened, and their family they know people that lived through this. You know, their fathers or their grandfathers lived through this, or grandmothers lived through this event, and have personal experience with it, and they get to tell their story. They feel as though they're telling their story, and it was so real. And it goes back to that cinematic documentary or honesty in the film that just, I think, shines through in this movie, in filming these people telling their story, really.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what Steve said. I mean, some of these people can relate to every one of the events and every one of these scenes in the movie, because it was their fathers or fathers that were part of them that were killed or murdered, and it was very touching. But, you know, if you talk about all these other actors, professional actors that were with us, they were all just amazing, you know, and they're not bit players, you know, they were all they're all experienced actors, and they brought a lot to the table at the same time. And I think we were the lucky ones to be able to film them and their characters and their performances.
So we've talked a little bit about things like, the shot moving through the house and some of that sort of stuff. I'm curious, what were some of the other challenging moments in shooting this? Is there one or maybe two specific moments that come to mind? Is like, oh, that was that was something we really worked at, and where the result is something you're particularly proud of?
Well, there's a lot of these POV shots that are challenging. I have to say, one of them is Molly's POV when she goes to see her sister's, where her sister was murdered at this river bed. And Marty wanted to feel her POV. He wanted a Steadicam shot to come down this kind of hillside along this narrow trail and then follows the riverbank to where the body was found. And there must have been 60, 70 people out there, extras, witnessing this event. And he wanted to feel the camera go right between him and through him. And he wanted to also see their reactions to her. It was a tough move for me because it was Steadicam down a kind of a steep incline, maneuvering through all these people. Everybody's looking at the lens, feeling sorry for Molly. And it was tough physically for me. And it was tough to coordinate, to try to make sure people didn't bump me or I didn't bump them. And yet the look to her was real and authentic. And the compliment of the shot had to be done also too, which was walking backwards downhill right in Molly's face while Ernest is escorting her down to the murder location, and to see her anguish on her face. And it was a very challenging shot and a very, very emotional for us and her to do. Yeah, it was a very tough time in the movie. And we all know the results of it. So it was tough to do both mentally and physically.
Yeah, and Steve, how about you? Any particular moments that come to mind?
Scott had carried the heavy lifting. My heavy lifting was staying involved in the show from, like I said, there were days I did not work. And so that can be a challenge too, as a camera operator, where you are sitting on the truck, waiting for your time to jump in there and go. And, but you have to be involved. You have to stay mentally right in there with them, so that when you are asked to do a shot, you are ready to go and know exactly why they're asking you to do the shot, and you're not. Yeah, the physicality wasn't an issue for me. I'm not carrying the Steadicam around. It was more mental, a chess game, more of just making sure that I'm getting in and doing the shots. And there isn't a lot of conversation. To Scott's credit, Marty is not. Marty goes through Rodrigo more, and Rodrigo doesn't tell Scott. Scott is such a professional. He knows. I mean, they all know that language, that cinema language, and I'm expected to know that too. And so that's a challenge, just without a lot of conversation about exactly what is your shot, but to get in there and do the shot that they expect you to do, without deep, explanations or no, do this instead of that. Yeah, that's the challenge, is just getting in there and doing the shot that they want without a lot of conversation about it.
That is true. I mean, he has to be able to know the language, and he did know the language. And when Steve was brought in, especially when we're doing simultaneous cameras, I mean, we're fighting each other, trying to get the best composition, trying to keep each other out of the shot. And it was just great complementary ways to work, and it really worked well. But it's tough to come in and be able to know what we're doing without much dialogue.
One of the ideas I think that we keep circling around and that you guys keep coming back to that I wanted to dig into a little bit more is just the emotion that came from shooting this story. And, you know, obviously this is, we sort of mentioned at the top how important this story is and how, you know, like the Tulsa Massacre, it's one of those things that kind of got buried over the last century, and coming back and sort of exposing it in this way and giving it this sort of platform to be seen and remembered, and give people an opportunity to not only know the history of what happened, but sort of respond to those events from the past and how they influenced and shaped the world of today. What was it like being on set for this story, you know, with, like you mentioned, a lot of the people who were related to people who were, you know, there at that time? I imagine that was quite a thing.
Oh, it was incredibly touching to listen to, you know, the leaders of the Osage, you know, nation, you know, talk about how they have been taken advantage of, and this is their moment to let the world know what has happened to their tribe. It was one of those times where you really, you know, you really have to feel for these people. You know, not only were they taken out of their original location in, I guess, Kansas, somewhere in Kansas, to get pushed into a land of rocks and grass, is what I remember Huska being, you know, and you know, you couldn't farm on that land. It's just full of rocks. But thank God that they found other ways to take advantage of that. And that was quite emotional to see that, and to feel the people who are finally getting their story told after being pushed away out of history, really.
I remember reading the book before going to film, and then being there and shooting in a field. And in the book, they describe how, like what Scott said, is the Osage were one of the last tribes to get reservation land. So they got the last pick of, you know, the last pick of land, and that land was, and we stood there on that ground that they had, which was fields of these rocks. And so to plow them, you couldn't plow these fields because you had to pick up a rock every 2 feet, big, heavy, giant rocks sticking out of the grasslands. And then they find oil, and that's taken away from them. Or they're in this movie here, the story is. So that was amazing. And then in the scenes where, again, Osage, members of the Gray Horse tribe, the Osage, were in our scenes crying because they're crying real tears of their now cathartically. This event on screen, the scene playing out, is a catharsis, perhaps, I don't know, but that it was, they're releasing some energy of this terrible event, this tragedy that happened to their people, their families, and their so it was incredibly touching. And then it was fantastic. One of my B camera second assistant, Benedict, was a member of the Osage Gray Horse tribe, and it was fantastic because he was telling me all the different stories and the little inside stories. And he got his naming ceremony done while filming because he lives in Pittsburgh, and he came back and during filming had a ceremony, naming ceremony. So it was on the weekend after filming, you know. So it was all around a wonderful invitation to be amongst these Osage people, then all warm and beautiful, and as Scott said earlier, so touching to hear. I think there's a scene with Chief Redcorn, and the way Marty filmed it too was very, again, honest, and there wasn't a oh gosh, I'm terrible at the words, but there wasn't a they spoke as they speak today. No one had a, what do you call it when you're trying to talk like an Indian, or talk like a, have a voice of the past. They talk honestly, and you could see it came across as they would.
I think Steve hit the nail on the head, and they talk with such emotion because they were bringing up their past and their history,
Personal experience.
Yes. And I think Marty recognized that the movie had to have them as a character, the Osage themselves as the people had to be part of that movie, not just an actor or an actress. And that's why he chose to shoot in the actual place in Oklahoma, on their land where these events really took place.
Whose land is this?
My land.
We actually shot in the Shoin brothers, who are the doctors, the devious doctors who performed autopsies and gave the bad medicine. We actually shot in their offices, their real offices that exist today. I mean, they were kind of dilapidated, and I know we cinematically kind of fixed them up, but it was their real offices, and I saw black and white photographs of pictures of them in those exact rooms that we were standing in. It was kind of eerie to know that we were in those places. And it was it's Marty chose to do that, and I think it was very important. I mean, he wanted to be in the real place while he was telling their story.
Yeah, and I think it's incredibly effective having that sort of tangibility and authenticity to it, to not just recreate history on screen, but to sort of live and breathe it for that time.
Everybody did such a great job. I think everybody's passion was there, and it shows in the movie. I think I have to give my hats off to Rodrigo for his lighting. He did a great job on the look of the film, and I think the assistants did a good job. I think Trevor Loomis did a remarkable job of focus and keeping all the gear, in top shape. And I just have to say everybody on the crew was probably just 100% into the movie, and it shows. And I'm kind of proud to be part of that too.
Again, yes, exactly what Scott said. It's a wonderful crew to work with, and my assistant John Holmes was fantastic to work with, and he worked well with Trevor Loomis, and the whole camera crew, and lighting and grip and lighting. Everyone it was a real pleasure to work on the movie itself. So, and like Scott said, everyone was involved in the story, and you could tell on the set that everyone was very vested in the story.
Despite the circumstances of being in Oklahoma in the summer during COVID. I think we all wore a mask 12 to 14 hours a day.
And the humidity, it was
quite uncomfortable. And, it was trying, but I think everybody knew what we were doing. We had one goal in mind, and that was to make a good movie. And we had a great director to follow. So I think that was the motivating factor. But the whole COVID thing was a tough world for 6 months that we were in Oklahoma.
Oh, I'm sure. It's been so interesting these past few years talking with other camera operators about working during that time, and just everybody to some extent had to adjust to a new reality in the aftermath of COVID. But just for filmmaking specifically, just the PPE protocols and the distancing and everything else, how much that changed the equation.
Yes, the distancing was tough. We were in the middle of it at that time of that pandemic. So the fear of any of us getting it was going to shut down, hundreds of people. And, we had strict protocol not to socialize after work, go to restaurants, go to a bar. And I think everybody stuck to that, which just kind of almost drove us all crazy. I mean, I think I only had dinner with Steve maybe 3 or 4 times out of 6 months. Nobody ever saw each other after work. It was a tough time to make movies on location.
It was funny at the screening. I almost didn't recognize people on the set when we went to see the other day, or like, because you didn't socialize, so you didn't get to know them at a crew gathering, which you normally would do, and you were wearing masks, of course, on set, but you weren't after work or in the same hotel or riding in the same van. Everyone was driving to work separated. So yeah, it is a fun, wild challenge to stay involved in those heat situations.
That's so funny. Steve mentioned that. Yeah, there was several people at the screening the other day, and I had trouble recognizing them because we all were covered up throughout the time that we spent together. There was not, I don't think, any time we took our mask off. And since we didn't, once they called wrap, you never saw anybody, because you got in your car, you went back to your apartment or wherever you were living, and you never saw anybody. You never knew what their mouth looked like. So it was interesting to see that some of our crew people and seeing them without a mask.
Yeah.
It was kind of shocking in a way.